since it is Media Literacy Week, I figured let's start by talking about media literacy. How would you define the term, and when it comes to health, science, the environment, why is media literacy so important? Andrea, let's start with you.
Oh, goodness. Well, thank you, Center for Communication, for inviting me. I feel very passionately about improving media and science literacy, and so I think my angle with regard to media literacy as a biomedical scientist really comes from, being able to encounter information and determine whether or not it's factual, verifiable, credible, and be able to use that information to make a decision about an outcome in your life, whether for you, your family, your day-to-day habits, as opposed to encountering false information and not understanding or not realizing that it is not credible, it is misleading. And I think today the ability to be media literate is more challenging than ever, even for people that are incredibly highly educated, because of all of the technological advancements that make, essentially plagiarizing, manipulating, and even just kind of drowning out the credible information with noise.
Sarit?
So as an educator, I think that one of the things that I try to think about a lot is the distinction between education, information, and messaging. And I think that all of these are used in the media right now. And one of the questions for me is helping consumers of media information use information about who the messenger is and what motivation that messenger might have as a key to helping them make sense of what they are reading or consuming.
Well, so that's, excuse me, that's a little bit like what we do as journalists. So when I think of media literacy, excuse me, in a minute, yeah. So when I think of media literacy, I think of, oh yeah, I might have to pause for just a minute. Sorry about this. Strong start. All right. Okay. I guess what I think about the fact that my grandfather had articles that he would sort of tape inside his kitchen cupboards, telling him what to eat. And when I started reporting, I thought about that, right? I thought about, like, my grandfather was an engineer. He was, like, curious about the world. Driving, he had a driver's license until the day he died, which is probably, in his early 90s. Not, he was just like an active, engaged, smart guy. I took that to heart when I started reporting, because it meant that, like, I understood that people were going to sort of use the information that I published to make decisions. I'm trying to bring this back around to the point of media literacy. So when I think about what goes into a story, I think about what information do I think I have? What is the source of that information? And to the point that you just raised, like, what are the possible incentives or motives of the individual who's providing it, right? Like, this is just sort of 101. And I would really love, when I think of media literacy, I would love you to read my articles with that same vantage point. Like, are you reading, when you read a story, am I clear about the sources that I'm citing? Am I giving you good context for those sources, for the information, right? Like, how much time do I spend being transparent? When I use words like, we were talking about this earlier, when I use words like rigorous, right? Like, we can talk about this a little bit more, but all right, I'll stop because I kind of took off there.
That was fascinating. So,
okay.
Can you talk, maybe, Sarit, you brought up the motivations. Can you talk about somebody who might spread information in the public sphere whose motivations aren't so clear, and how you keep an eye out for that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that, and I think this is something that media needs to grapple with a little bit right now. Like, to what extent is the motivation for media to sell me something, even if it is to sell me the media itself, right, or to perpetuate that? I think that there is a idealized sense that, and I would sort of, go back to what you said about, like, thinking your grandfather was trying to get information from trusted media sources. I wonder, to a large extent, what the motivations of our media consumers are right now, and what we think of as trusted sources, and what the responsibility of media outlets and media professionals are to. I mean, we talk a little bit about, like, the concerns about who experts are, but to what extent is it the responsibility of folks within the media to serve as experts themselves in the way that they translate information?
I want to hear a little bit about how each of you got into your respective fields, like how you decided that you wanted to be a scientist or a journalist, and what that journey looked like. So, Andrea.
Sure. So I grew up in Eastern Connecticut in a pretty rural town. I was a Navy brat. My dad was stationed at the Groton sub base. And we had a small house that abutted the local township park, which was very heavily wooded. And so I spent my childhood years playing in the woods with my brother. And I didn't play video games till I was in college. I played a friend's Wii, and I, like, pulled a hamstring Wii bowling because I got really into it. But I used to collect bugs in the woods, and I would, collect them, put them in my little aquariums, catalog them. One time, my dad dabbled in squirrel hunting. Don't judge. He had shot
as in he shot the squirrels.
Yes, and we ate them at one point. Not the best, but he had shot a squirrel that had this lump in its forehead, and so when he was skinning it, he cut it open, and it had this little pupa inside, and I was like, what is that thing? I was probably 8 years old, and so we brought it to the Yukon agriculture school, and they were like, oh, it's a botfly, and I was like, oh, tell me more. So my mom had actually gone back to school to get her master's in education, and she ended up being a science teacher in middle school when I was, starting about 8, 9, or 10 years old. And so she had a membership to the library at Eastern Connecticut State University, and I tagged along, and I found the Physician's Guide to Arthropods of Medical Importance, a textbook any 8-year-old would read. And I would walk around, I did judo as a kid, so I would walk around judo tournaments reading passages to whoever would sit still about, some parasite that would eat your flesh while you were sleeping in Africa. And I was obsessed. I was obsessed with, like, the shock value, the creepy crawlies. I was in a school that allowed us to do, like, creative projects, so I did things like head lice and leeches. And my mom ordered some leeches for me to use as a visual aid in 2nd grade. And really, I just had a wonderful group of teachers and people that just let me embrace my curiosity of the natural world. And that evolved into not just the parasites, but, like, the infectious diseases themselves as I was in high school. And I even did an independent study my senior year of high school. And I was like, I'm going to study infectious diseases and get a PhD. And that's literally what I did. So my journey was pretty straightforward. I was just always obsessed with really nerdy science. And then I got into kind of the science communication after realizing that not everybody had the same sort of curiosity. A lot of people were really apprehensive about these topics and even fearful. And part of it is to try to, dispel a lot of the misinformation, but also, like, science is why we have everything in our life, right? Like your pocket computers, your cars, your houses, you know, whether you can bake a cupcake and it rises. And so I really want people to stop being fearful and be more inquisitive and curious and realize that, you know, bad things can happen if science is manipulated or abused, but it doesn't mean science itself is bad.
And we'll definitely get to some of the work you've done dispelling misinformation. But Sarit, was it as clear cut for you, your journey?
It does not involve leeches. I was always somebody who enjoyed being able to explain things that people wanted to know about but were afraid to ask about. And so it turned out that that was sexuality and statistics. And so those are two things that I've one of the things that really motivates me in my professional career is the idea that you can explain anything in a way that makes it super accessible to anyone. And I think, and something I'd love to hear the folks assembled here talk about is I think that often scientists and public health folks struggle with an ability to communicate clearly. I think sometimes because folks feel like if we make it seem too easy, then like anybody could do it. And the irony of that is that in some ways that paternalism, for lack of a better word, I think has backfired in some of the ways in which experts are demeaned right now. And I think that to the extent that those of us who actually do have expertise can communicate about it and can leverage journalists as partners to communicate about it in a way that is accessible and engaging, I think that that might enable us to combat some of that tension that has dismissed experts right now.
I do want to hear more about your expertise, though. Like you mentioned explaining things that people want to know about, but they're afraid to ask. So can you give an example of something that you know people want to know about, but...
Well, I started my career as a health educator, working in a whole bunch of adolescent health clinics on Staten Island. I'm a born and bred New Yorker. I am proud of having worked in every one of our 5 boroughs. But I think that, and I got a PhD a little bit later in my career. I started out working at a whole bunch of different community health centers. And one of the things that drove me was the extent to which there was all of this practice-based knowledge from individuals on the ground. And a lot of the directives of the way in which they were being told to do their work was coming from CDC and HRSA and NIH in ways that didn't resonate with them. They knew things that researchers didn't know. And I was very motivated to go back to school and get a PhD in order to do that type of community-based collaborative research that tries to be that voice to do much more bottom-up as opposed to top-down work in this space.
So Melanie, you told us the story about was it your father?
It was my grandfather,
Your
yes,
grandfather.
yeah.
So clearly the news was in your life from an early age. Is that fair to say?
Well, I will say that it was a presence, but I didn't think about becoming a journalist until I was like almost out the door at college. I was very interested in economics and public policy and I had even worked on a couple of political campaigns, and I will tell you, I got a look, and I thought, this is not what I'm interested in. What I was interested in was the full debate. I was interested in information for everyone. And I will say, I kind of joke that I came to journalism by way of waiting tables. I really loved talking to people. And journalism gives me a way to do it. And so what ended up happening is that I was in college, I was in a class, a bunch of journalists came through, and I thought, yes. And And those journalists took time to talk to me. I approached them afterwards. They took time to talk to me. They told me about their careers. Their careers had all sorts of different paths, right? And but basically what they told me to do was just get out there and try. Get out there and do it. And when I did, I discovered that I loved it. I also discovered it was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. But one of the points that you just made about where information resides and how rich experience is, and how that sometimes gets overlooked, that is actually one of the great things about the role that journalists play, is that we can grab the statistics, and we have smart, much smarter people than we are help us unpack them and explain them and give them context, but then we can also talk to people about their experiences in a way that informs those statistics and helps us understand the world better, that we would never have grasped with the statistics alone. And so that's where I think journalism, that is its heartbeat. That is what I love about this job. It is never, every year I do it, that becomes sort of more and more palpable.
Am I allowed to jump in? So what I love about what you just said is that I think that it draws to light something specifically about what I would refer to as scientific communication, whether it's being done by journalism. So a lot of the combination of factual information and vivid story from a psychological perspective is what enables people to remember and encode information. And so the ways in which and then the other piece of it, which I don't know whether we're going to get to, but the other piece that is so insidious but also powerful right now is the fact that so many of us process information primarily through affect, through emotion. And I don't have to explain to everybody that the primary emotion right now that is being used in this misinformation age is disgust, actually. I think we often think it's anger, but it's actually, in my opinion, it's disgust.
Can you give an example?
The ways in which, this is very sort of self-referential. I don't know how many people are focusing on this, but the ways in which RFK is talking about public health workers and the public health workforce as people who are lazy and don't there is this, and it almost, if you see people's faces, it really is a disgust, what we would say characteristically in psychology as the disgust face when folks are speaking. A video of American protesters having feces dropped on their heads.
You're talking about the AI video that the president shared
image.
After the No Kings protest.
Yeah. And so I think, but I think that maybe, and maybe you guys do it all the time, but I wonder the extent to which you have at front of mind the affect that you are generating in your reader while they are reading the story. And I think, you can use that as a tool for good or for ill. I hope you will use it for good. But I think that is something, having that at front of mind is incredibly important, I think, for this idea of health literacy more broadly and specifically about the consumption of misinformation.
Andrea, you had mentioned a viral story that I think elicited disgust in people, and perhaps that's why it went so viral. It had something to do with
lead in protein powders.
Lead in protein.
Everybody's heard the Consumer Reports story. Have you read my article?
If you've heard about this.
Yes.
Okay.
So I'll give a quick synopsis, but I love what you two just said about the emotion that it cultivates, and the intent of the information, and how I'm a biomedical scientist. I would love to just throw data at people all day long, but like I was doing shock value stuff to get emotion out of people when I was a little kid, to tell them cool facts about science, right? Like scientists are scientists because they're uniquely obsessed with whatever they're studying, right? And so, we use a lot of data. And I think because our training historically does not focus on communicating that data to the public, right? It's focusing on communicating within our peer groups and within our colleagues and within the scientific ecosystem that we, historically, I didn't have public speaking training or communication training or writing. I mean, scientific writing, sure, yeah, and I took all my undergrad, minimum requirements for, literature and such. But I think, I saw that there was this dearth of scientists getting out in the public sphere, and so people are not getting excited about science, and instead they're getting fearful of it. And so, I think data is what makes something an objective reality, but the anecdote, the story is what it clicks with people, right? And so when I write, the reason I started writing my own newsletter, and I'm not remotely would ever characterize myself as a journalist, but I always write with what's the TLDR, what's the big takeaway? Why am I writing about why you don't need to be afraid of this Consumer Reports protein powder lead story? Well, because it's misrepresenting bad science to scare people about something they don't actually need to be scared about that's going to impact their health in a negative way.
How is the science bad? How has it been misrepresented?
So for this particular story, so Consumer Reports, everybody knows Consumer Reports, right? They used to give you recommendations on vacuum cleaners. Now they've become a very powerful, they have a lobbying arm where they actually were the co-sponsors of the food dye ban and the ultra-processed food ban in California, and they work really extensively with the Environmental Working Group, which is another quite anti-science activist organization. But so they do these studies where they kind of, take consumer products and they test them for these trace amounts of various substances that exist on the planet, and then they put out these reports that are self-published, right, in their little PDF form, and they use these headlines that are very fear-mongering and say, high levels of lead found in popular protein powders, right? That was their headline. Well, and so when you actually look at their study, the actual scientific methods were incredibly flawed. They basically bought 23 different jars of protein powders, one for 23 brands, and they took a couple of scoops out of each jar and they sent it off to a lab, and they said, test it for amounts of various metals that exist on our planet, right? And lead is one of them. So everything, including people, have trace amounts of lead in your body because lead is a part of the planet. If you live on Earth, you have lead in your body, and we know that high levels of lead can cause health effects, but they put out this report insinuating that these protein powders were contaminated or had such high levels that they actually color-coded red, do not consume, never eat in a single week, and then there was yellow and green and so on. But what they actually did was they used a threshold, a safety level that is based on Proposition 65. And for those of you who are not familiar, Proposition 65 is a law in California that basically says that any state legislator can put a chemical on that list and say it's linked to cancer, even though at real world exposures you would never have an increased risk of cancer. And so it's a very exaggerated list that causes unnecessary fear and in many ways just really distracts from the issues that we should be talking about. So these levels of lead were set, hundreds of fold lower than would actually cause health issues, but they're using that as their benchmark. And so they're saying, oh, well, there's 1,500% more lead compared to this level. And so they're telling people that they need to be scared of these things when if you actually look at the scientific data, those levels are not reaching, levels that have been set by U.S. regulatory agencies or European safety agencies. But now all these people are terrified that they've been poisoning themselves with lead because they happen to buy one of these protein powders.
That's fascinating. So that sounds like a real conflict of interest in that they're seen as a kind of rigorous, non-biased news source, but then they're also lobbying behind the scenes.
Yeah, it's a problem with, I guess partly like regulatory capture and how politics works in the US. And I'm not a political expert by any stretch of the imagination, but there is a lot of this conflict of interest, and they kind of position themselves as this, on paper, on tax, records, they're listed as a nonprofit, just like the Environmental Working Group or, other organizations. And so they position themselves as this watchdog that, the real scientists aren't, they don't care about, or industry doesn't care about, and they're the ones that are looking out for your health. And so when they write these articles, it actually undermines the good science that actually sets these real safety levels. But more importantly, it then cements them as being this trusted source, because people read it and they're like, oh my gosh, they're looking out for me. Thank goodness they actually looked into it, even though it's not accurate and it's wildly misleading. But then they get more donors, they get more members, they get more subscriptions. It's this vicious cycle, and it kind of fuels this accelerated pipeline that their content has shifted from recommending vacuum cleaners to now we're going to pretend we're toxicological experts.
And clearly other news organizations bear some responsibility because they write similar articles and they refer back to it.
Yes.
Melanie, can you talk a little bit about how the business model of legacy news has contributed to some of this science misinfo?
Well, okay, so I can speak to my experience, and I'm gonna in the spirit of Media Literacy Week, I would also like to say that there are, very vigorous debates within newsrooms about between editors and reporters, amongst editors, amongst reporters, editors, and, for example, I worked for a while at the Wall Street Journal. They had an in-house standards and ethics team. I think in-house standard and ethic, there was in the newsroom. And so, I will say, I have been party to very thoughtful, and I would say, careful conversations about what we say and how we say it. Going back to my grandfather, knowing, somebody is going to use this information to make a decision. So with all of that said, there is, I think, all newsrooms right now, you're always going to get asked the question, who's reading your articles? This question of how well are we serving readers? And one way that people answer that question is they ask, well, how many people are reading it? That is one way to measure it. And I will say, that has evolved, at least in my experience over the course of my career, into something more sophisticated, more thoughtful, but also limited, right? We just don't have perfect information. And so we may ask how many people are reading it. For example, I had a story that I personally loved at the Wall Street Journal. Not a lot of people read it.
What was the story?
This was a story about hospital prices. It was a story about a study, and the study was looking at what happens when hospital prices go up, what happens to jobs in the local economy. So this is a huge question.
I read that article.
Oh, all right. Well, yes, one of the readers. Okay, so wasn't, the journal standards, it didn't knock it out of the park when it comes, but internally, that story was recognized for having value because the people who read it really spent time with it. Right? And so...
And the journal is tracking how long a reader is looking at their screen?
Yes. Okay, so I get I will tell you, I was not not the best student of like some of these metrics. I think like all journalists, I had sort of a curiosity and a discomfort and a certain level of understanding of them. But yes, I will say, that was an instance when they said, we don't actually care if it was driving crazy amounts of traffic. We know that this story mattered to people who read it. So where I think, and we talked a little bit about this, where I think there's sort of real pressure on newsrooms is that they're constricting, they're getting smaller. So my team, my old team at the Wall Street Journal just got a lot smaller in the last couple of weeks. There were layoffs. And when you think about across the health and science team, and when you think about, do you want news organizations investing in health and science reporting in this moment? Those who are left have tougher choices to make, right, about what to cover and how much time and resources are available to cover it.
A young person might be hearing you talk about layoffs at the Wall Street Journal, and they're saying well, is it even worth going into this field? Should I be trying to work at a place like that that's firing people?
Well, look, so I will say my career has spanned a couple of different news organizations. I've gone through cycles of hiring and contraction in newsrooms. You don't go into journalism for job security, unfortunately, but it is amazing the opportunities that exist today, outside of what you would consider a big masthead or a big, traditional newsroom. And a lot of the reporters that I've known over the years are doing sort of interesting work at small nonprofits. There are people who are dedicated, smart, and singularly obsessed, in this case with news, and they are launching sort of really great newsletters and newsrooms. And so I left the Journal about a year ago. I'm with a small nonprofit newsroom now. We work with other small nonprofit newsrooms, and we do sort of good work. There's a lot of opportunity and creativity. I'm happy to talk to anyone, about it. But I'd say yes, please go into journalism. If you feel passionate about it, get in there. And it's great.
There are, not to be too much of a downer, but there are kind of parallel crises happening in your respective fields in academia, in the health regulatory agencies. There are major layoffs. What's your kind of pitch to somebody who's interested in science or science communication, who's a little scared about all that?
Yeah, no, it's, I will not sugarcoat it. It is a wild ride right now. My company, my full-time job in biotech just announced a reduction in force. I hate that acronym, but it's pretty much universal because, like you mentioned, the cost of hospital stays and the local economy. Well, what happens in academic research impacts what happens in industry research and what happens to developing new therapeutics or diagnostics or medical devices. That comes from science. And so as we got academic research and as we got government research and we got that infrastructure, then it impacts industry, which is still part of the scientific ecosystem, but it ultimately is going to impact public health and society at large. And it's also why we're seeing a lot of these economic impacts across all sectors. And so, it's scary times. I think a lot of us who have kind of fallen into science communication, we've made really great connections with journalists, and now we have this rapport where we're like, hey, someone at your media outlet just mischaracterized that Petri dish study. Can we talk? And they're actually receptive to it. So it's building these relationships. But most of us are doing it as a hobby in our free time. And our free time is just really limited, and we don't have infrastructure, right? We're playing this perpetual game of whack-a-mole. And so, my call to action is, if you have a passion for news and providing information and maybe a little hint of interest in science, like, we need people committed to, even if it's not at a legacy media outlet, we need people committed to credible and contextualized science communication, because we need less of your protein powder is laced with lead and more vaccines have saved millions of lives, and telling parents that not vaccinating their kids against hepatitis B means that more kids are going to get chronic hepatitis and liver cancer and die. Like, that's what we need. We need the good scientific journalism, and, we need that younger generation who isn't maybe quite as cynical as me, and some of the other, millennials and older generations, to kind of be willing, because the ecosystem is pretty vitriolic. It's hostile, right? Like, I post something on social media and I'm just trounced by trolls. And so you do have to have this like fortitude, this ability to kind of withstand that, because every journalist, your name's on a piece, you're gonna hear the brunt of whatever the response is to that piece. And so
who are the trolls and why?
Oh, I mean, for me, it's mostly the Maha fanatics, or really anybody that's kind of fallen into pseudoscience or conspiracy theories, because I spend a lot of time debunking and trying to assuage concerns. But a lot of the anti-science rhetoric really crosses political ideologies, and I've particularly started to dig in more on the chemophobia that we see pervading like even liberal legislation, like the ban on artificial food dyes, which just means that they're going to replace them with natural colorings that are less studied and more expensive and less safe. But it's based in this low science literacy and policymakers that are being influenced by these organizations. And so, I want people to understand that it's not a political thing, and it's not an education level thing. It's really this identity, it's this community, this ideology that really determines whether you're going to fall prey to misinformation when it comes to science or not.
Do you want to add anything?
I want to go back to what I was saying before. I mean, I agree with Andrea, like, we need you. And I, truth. And I just want to go back to this idea about, like, I understand that journalists don't do messaging. And you do information. I think you do education, but maybe you could be okay with my saying what you do is communication. And what I would ask of you is to think about the ways to communicate with your audience in this new age, in this new space. Because, and I'm just going to go back to, like, I want to kind of connect these two things. The lead in the protein powder example, I hear a lot of folks countering sound bites with complex explanations, which are true and are needed and are boring and are hard to, like, remember. And, like, this is also very self-referential, but for some reason it came to mind. You'll see whether or not you like it. When I was a little girl, I wanted to be in advertising. When I was in third grade, I entered Hebrew National Salami had a contest for their new slogan, and they wanted it to be something about the fact that they were 98% fat-free. I did not win, but the I did get an honorable mention. But the campaign that won was a whole bunch of very lean athletes, and it said something like, Joe Smith, 94% fat-free. Hebrew National Salami, 98% fat-free. And I tell you that example because I think that a lot of the misinformation about health, like health statistics, should be countered not with analogy. Mm-hmm. And my question to you as journalists is, how can you communicate with analogy? in a way that sparks affect, sparks positive affect. We think that disgust is like keeps us in the click hole. That's not cursing, right?
No, it's not.
But it does keep us there, but it makes us so ick. Right. And there are ways in which reading a story, if you are engaged in communication, can make you feel good at the end of it. And not to like put you on the spot, when I listen to your podcast, I feel that way very often. That after I am listening, even if it's something that's like challenging, like about Darth Vader, I then feel like, okay, I have had an experience. And I would challenge you to think about ways in which you can give your readers, your listeners, your viewers an experience that in communication with them is helpful to them in this age.
Can I add one? I 100% agree with this, because the reason that the misinformation, especially about health topics, spreads is because it's really easy to say something false in black and white, and people like black and white because complexity and nuance is not sexy. And so when I talk about these complex topics, especially when I'm debunking it, I start with no, you don't need to freak out about your protein powder. And if you want to know why you don't need to freak out, here's my very complex scientific explanation. But the goal is, the majority of people are probably not going to get past the abstract or the headline, right? We know that. We have data that most people are not reading articles in full. So if my goal is to alleviate fear and, address the misinformation, you have to put it out there first. And then for the people that want the granularity or want to fall into that, rabbit hole of nerdy science, then that information is there. But I think the media has a responsibility to message, because right now the communication or the education is premised on the fact that a lot of sources are giving them misinformation. And so by merely repeating it or redelivering it in a new package, you're doing the same disservice as the people that created the misinformation in the first place. So I think we really do need to reframe it as, what's your ultimate goal with creating this piece? Like, do we want to create outrage or disgust or fear? Or do we want to improve health, make people feel like they're not being poisoned by every single thing they encounter, that our infrastructure and regulatory ecosystems are actually there to protect us? Because that's really, that's the precipice we're at right now.
This has been great, and you guys are getting into heady, deep territory. But I'm getting a signal that it's time for the Q&A portion of this. So if you have a question, and we're prioritizing students, please form a line behind the mic stand. I believe it's over here. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know. Questions about misinformation, how the internet is changing, how we think of how we get our science news, the non-traditional sources that are shaping the narratives around new scientific studies, career advice. It's all welcome.
Hello, my name is Zaria, and I'm an intern for the Center for Communication. Thank you guys so much for being here. I found the panel really, really beneficial. My question is, you guys already mentioned like the misinformation spreading about like vaccines and how recent political, climates have been using misinformation. And I find that we are a lot less receptive to science recently. Like, a lot of people have a lot of confirmation bias and have started to not believe in science anymore regarding vaccines, regarding like the new questioning of Tylenol causing autism. Like, how can we get back to trusting science?
Great question. Anybody want to jump in?
want the psychologist
Yeah,
to
let's hear it.
provide some thoughts first.
Oh, boy. I wish that I knew the answer to that question, because that would be like all that I would be doing all day. I think, something that I say a lot in the work that I do is that in order to be trusted, we have to act trustworthy. And I think that one of the real challenges that we have had in public, I think there's two pieces. One is, one of the challenges we've had in public health messaging is that we have relied on threat messaging, and we've relied on focusing on loss. And it is true that folks are super averse to loss, but we misunderstand what the loss is. So I'll give you like a really an example from COVID. I think that public health community thought that folks felt like the loss was you're going to get sick. And that is like an abstract loss. The immediate loss that I experience every day is having to put on this mask or not being able to have that interaction with another individual. And so I think that we focus on threat messaging, which does not help people. And we don't think about the way, what the actual motivations for people are. Like in my own work around sexual health, people do people don't engage in risk behavior. Like people don't go out on a Saturday night and say like, what I'm going to do is some risk behavior. No, like they are going out to have pleasure. They're going out to have intimacy. And so I think that that has been a super problematic thing that we in public health have to own. The second thing I think is, it is very challenging, and maybe this is something y'all can help us with. It is very challenging to remember things that don't happen. So the COVID vaccines prevented a whole bunch of people from getting really sick. But that absence of effect isn't top of mind, right? And I think that I don't know, like I don't 100% know the answer to that, but I was thinking about the absolute malignment right now of our public health workforce, which here in New York City, these people worked day and night. I know how many of you went to get COVID vaccines at these centers that were opened all over the city, and the folks who were working there like did not get extra pay to work there at night and on the weekends. And that isn't remembered. Like what, and I don't know how to, I feel like both of those things are at play right now, and I'm not 100% sure how to get back to it. Thank you. That was satisfying.
I have one. I'll just add on one. So the Edelman Trust Barometer, puts out its annual report in 2024. Corporations, government, and media. Sorry, guys. They were lower than some of the other institutions where the source was a trustworthy source to tell them about new technology and scientific innovations. The two highest were people like me and scientists. So there's a way to leverage the dispersion of trust of scientists is now aligned with a peer. So people are more likely to believe information or trust that information if it's from someone they can relate to. It's partly why I spend time on social media and like giving people a peek behind the curtain, like, no, yes, I'm a nerd, and yes, I wear a lab coat and I do experiments, but like I also have a life, I live in the community, I run, why would I participate in behaviors that I know are poisoning people, right? If I'm simultaneously doing them. It's the same thing that I talk about when I try to address like pesticide misinformation, which is a different ideology where farmers are fully, on board with genetic engineering there, but they're often anti-vaccine. And it's like, well, give them a peek behind the curtain, show them what it's like on a farm, show them you're not dousing things with pesticides, right? You're using this amount of volume. And so we have to give people context and analogies so that they can relate to it and realize that like scientists aren't these like people hiding up in these ivory towers, right? Like we're part of the same communities that you are, and we have the same motivations. We want to be healthy. We want our families to be healthy. And, how can we leverage that and also collaborate with these peers to rebuild that trust?
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Naya. I'm a senior at Baruch College, and what really piqued my interest while you guys were speaking was about the lead in the protein powders. I am an active gym goer, and I was just talking with my my gym bestie about that the other day. We were like, do we have to throw out all of our protein powder? Like, what the heck? But my question for you guys would be like, how can we as like just a common viewer kind of like navigate that misinformation? Like, how do I even know what's real, or like what signs should I look for as a viewer?
All right, I'll go first. So, I think if we're talking about health and science, there's a lot of like red flags for misinformation. So, there's some obvious ones, right? If someone's making like blanket all or none statements, like often if they're using these really emotionally laced terms like toxic levels or high levels, like usually if you look at what's actually happening, it's much more nuanced. Generally, anything related to biomedical science, health science is much more complicated than what headlines will make it out to be. But I think, the point about looking at what the motivation is of who is delivering that information, right? This was not a verified study, right? This is done by an organization that has a vested interest in driving traffic to their website, driving subscriptions, involved in lobbying efforts. And yeah, I do think that we need to repeal the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, because we do need regulation of supplements so that we know that they're safe. But that's kind of a separate topic that, interplays with this. But I think generally speaking, if a scientific story or a news article about a scientific story is evoking these really, really powerful negative emotions, fear, anxiety, disgust, outrage, like usually 99.9% of the time, I made up that statistic, but I'm going to stand by it. It's misleading in some way, and the truth is probably much less scary. And I think it's really important nowadays, because you have these influencers and, policymakers that have kind of co-opted what is perceived to be truth. We really need to verify with multiple sources more than ever, which means more work for us. And I wish that there was an easy solution. I think right now navigating information is probably the most difficult it's ever been, because of all the different technologies and all the different conduits that people are getting it from.
I would just add that one of the problems with a lot of kind of influencer-led news is that they will present themselves as a foil to legacy institutions, and this is just marketing, and they all do it, and it's really cheap. And I think we, as a society, are like well aware of how legacy news and government can have corrupted messages, and I think we're lagging in how we understand how these social media entities are also susceptible to their own forms of corruption. They're incentivized to speak very, very quickly, because that's what algorithms reward, which is like, if a topic is trending, you got to jump on the bandwagon, whether you know anything about it or not. Influencers, we call them influencers because they sell us things, sometimes without disclosing it. So I think, like, for me, part of media literacy is just understanding that the people who say that they're the real truth tellers are also susceptible to really the same forces that made the old system bad. And I think that's just about having a diverse media diet.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jaquan. I currently attend LAU at the Brooklyn campus. And my question is more so kind of following along with what Naya said. I was really intrigued about the whole misinformation thing. And, with the rise of AI currently in our generation, I myself, not only as a viewer, but also as a journalist, kind of find it difficult sometimes because, when you're looking through news stories or when you're talking about news with, like, somebody else, it's kind of hard to be like, well, is that true? Or, like, where'd you get that from? So, with the rise of AI, do you think is there like a way we could, like, not only minimize the impact it has on, like, the environment, with it, like, disrupting ecosystems, stuff like that, but also minimize its impact on, like, people? There's so many times where, like, I'll be in a discussion with another friend and they'll say, but I don't know if that's actually true or not. So I feel like that's kind of like one of the struggles. I hope you guys can hear me.
Yeah, no, that was a great question. AI. Who's going to crack the code?
I mean, the only thing I'm going to say about AI is we need regulatory guardrails in order to ensure that it doesn't accelerate further and make it even more difficult to determine what's real and what's not. We see it even in scientific publication. I don't know if you guys saw there was a news article about it, but there was a paper and there was a schematic of a rat that was used in the study, and it had these gigantic testicles. That's not a curse word, right? But it was, the entire graphic was AI, and the peer reviewers just didn't even notice it, and that speaks to the academic publishing landscape. But more and more scientific retraction watchdogs, legitimate people who scour this, they're finding that AI is duplicating figures and reproducing things and outright fabricating, and that's just in scientific publication. So, I don't know, aside from we need regulatory guardrails on it, I don't know.
Yeah, and the problem is that when you Google it, it's AI giving you the Google
That's giving you the first
result.
thing.
I want to tell folks about another psychological principle that I think to me is very salient right now that might be interesting or useful as you think about the work that you guys do. And it's something that's called the sleeper effect in psychology. And it's this idea that we remember content, but we have a hard time remembering the source. Our source memory is poor. I remember that I heard it somewhere, but I'm not sure. And so this is why unreliable sources become more impactful over time. And the thing that I think is exacerbating this for us right now is that one way that our brains usually encode source memory is by a visual cue. And the problem is that every single thing we get right now, we get from this little teeny tiny telephone. I can read a journal article on this telephone, I can see TikTok on this, right? So there isn't that same type of cueing. And so I wonder the ways in which journalists can embed some type of source cue into your work that would help people remember or hold on to the extent to which this is a more or less reliable source.
That's fascinating. Yeah. Do you want to add anything?
Well, so I am sort of working on a project now that could potentially involve the use of AI as a tool. And it is maybe, it is, in this case, the question that you asked, I think what I'm offering is perhaps maybe not the sort of a perfect answer to your question, except for the fact that we understand that it's a tool that is flawed, and it is a tool at all of our disposal. And if I wish I had an answer other than I do what I do. Anytime I consider a piece of information, I do what we do, right? Which is that you start pulling the thread. What is the origin of this? Can I trace the origin?
Right.
Can I pick up the phone and call somebody? Can I sort of triangulate or cross-reference? Can I find? Can I get to the primary document? I have had the same conversation with friends where I'm like, do I know this is true? Where did this come from? The thing on the internet. That's what it was. But yes, for the purposes of reporting, I do we do what we do as journalists. We just keep pulling the thread until we get to sort of ideally sort of the primary source. So.
And so what's the responsibility of embedding that source into the piece itself?
Is that what you meant? Like,
no,
so
no,
what
I'm
is it-
just,
no, no, no.
I'm just asking.
No, I love that. So wait, when you say embedding that,
I
what is
mean,
it that
like,
you mean?
I, as a reader, am reading it, and do I have some type of conceptualization of, like, where did you get that information
No,
from?
that's
Not
great.
just the, like, so-and-so said, but other research that you did. How do I understand that as a reader?
Now that's great. Like, so there are ways that like different publications do it, right? So they start linking, which I think is fantastic. But this is actually something where if we're like talking about media's role in this, like thinking about ways in which we can, I guess, like what you say, like your term is like encode the primary sources, like, and the context that a curious reader could sort of like then follow and like see for themselves. Like, I do think newsrooms like ask questions about that, but I think we can do more. And just to sort of like finish a thought, like earlier you were talking about how like some really important foundational information, it can be sort of boring. Our job as journalists is to find a way to make it like resonate.
Yes, please.
Yes. No, and that is like, it is a challenge. And it is a challenge for a couple of reasons. Like, there's just sort of like the craft of writing. And there are like writers I adore because they do it really, really, really well. And then there is like the tension inside of newsrooms, right? So if you're sort of like paying attention to when readers stop reading and they start reading when you give them the important foundational context, right? Like, and it slows a story down, right? Like, do you find a way to like tighten that up and just move on? Or do you find a way to like do better? Right? Like, and I think that's a discussion we could have as journalists. I mean, like, there are times when I'm sitting and I'm trying to write something and I think, like, I'm putting myself to sleep. But it's important. It's really important. And so, like, in what way can we, and there are reporters who do it really well. And and I should give credit to editors, too. I'm sure there are editors' handiwork all over it. But, like, in what ways can we use interesting video or graphics, embedding links, footnotes, sort of illustrations, like anything that helps provide. And here's one, I'll just finish with this. One of the things that I think about is when we cover a subject over and over and over and over again, we tend to, like, because the news keeps, like, there's like these iterative, like, incremental changes in the news. Some of that foundational information might appear in the first and second stories, and then it drops off. And so the question is, like, does it bear repeating every single time? Like, is there a good way to do it? Because what if
my
you only-
HBO show gives me the recap every single time.
Okay, so this is like, this is great.
I mean, right?
Yeah,
Like, there
this
has to be a way to do it.
Yes.
Well, and I think, to the point of like the AI, right? Like, we have to assume that AI is going to be used for ill, right? And so with science misinformation, we know that to get ahead of it before it's out, the horse is out of the barn, pre-bunking it, is more effective than debunking. And so can you operate as you're writing as a journalist, assuming that there's someone else out there that's using AI to create a story, content, data, fabricate data, and how can you put veracity, like, to the reader, make it clear that your writing, your reporting is truthful, objective, not written by a bot, and then become that trusted source so that they start to improve their media literacy through absorption, right? The more that they consume things that are written by a human and are verifiable and have embedded primary sources, we can't, without, institutional regulation on AI, we as individuals can't do anything about it, right? We can try to get ahead of it, and we can try to make it clear that we're not using it, and you have to be more skeptical, because it can be really difficult to determine when something is fabricated or not. So I think there's the individual responsibility, and the systemic responsibility is,
Thank you.
Thanks, great question.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alyssa Johnson. I'm a Penn State alum. I graduated in May, and I study broadcast journalism. And I have a question about advocacy. You specify specifically in the newsroom or just out in the field. How do you go about telling a story that isn't easily digestible to the masses? And how can you not pivot, but find a way that it is really received to everyone, knowing that everyone won't agree with you or disagree with you?
That's a great question. I'll jump in really quickly. I think the kinds of stories I like are ones that are based around characters, and people respond really strongly to a simple narrative that you can kind of sprinkle the complicated stuff in along the way. So it's always about finding a compelling person. Maybe you can start with them. When you talk about people reacting negatively to you, unfortunately, that's just a fact of the industry, and it's painful. And people will say mean, unfair things to you. They will project onto you things that are outrageous and completely, detached from reality. But you get used to it, and we all experience a version of that. So you get stronger.
I wonder what you all would say about this idea. People react, so much of our media consumption right now, I think, is telling us what we should think. And one thing that people really react very strongly to is people telling them what to do. I don't know, in the bathroom at Hunter College where I work, somebody had written have a nice day, and somebody had written underneath, don't tell me what to do. So I wonder whether there are ways when we are talking, I wonder about ways in which journalism can help people, can put that agency back to our readers or our consumers. I feel that we have been stripped of agency. So much of short form media is just telling us what to do and what to think and what to buy all the time. And I do wonder whether saying you have the power to decide what to think about this. And my perspective is to say to you, I'm going to give you the power to decide what you actually think about this, which is different, and we haven't talked about this at all, but which is different from presenting false equivalence, which I think is a very dangerous thing to do. But
do you want to just define false equivalence for?
It's saying that there are two sides to every story. You get it. But I do wonder whether when crafting something about an issue that might not be as easily, exciting or whether there is that, I'm going to give you this agency. I don't know.
Thank you so much.
I was just going to add, I think something that I try to keep in mind when I'm trying to address misinformation is I know that 50% of people are going to disagree with what I'm saying because they've fallen down into a conspiracy theory hole or whatever. But I think one of the things that I try to message is what's the common theme, right? So even if you're talking about a marginalized community or a particular, interest piece that is going to offend some people and be positively received by others, that there's going to be a varying degree of responses. Is there a way to integrate some sort of common thing that everyone as human beings can agree upon? And maybe in some cases the answer is no, right? I think there are some things that I will never agree with certain people about, but I think to be a good journalist, to kind of weave that into the story, because then you get that emotional buy-in and the willingness that they're going to actually read it, consume it, and possibly share it with somebody else, maybe the audience that you really want to get to.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Jared Batista. I'm currently a media arts student at LAU Brooklyn. And for my question, I wanted to know from you guys, like, how can you tell the difference between misinformation, or I guess disinformation, from even well-regarded like news sources? Because I know, at least from my own experience, I'll look up something on Google or Safari, whatever, and I'll get two completely different sides. So whether it's something political or scientific. And so I guess I wanted to know, like, us as the readers or researchers, like, what can we read knowing, I guess, it's true, and what can we trust going forward, especially at this state of the world right now?
I don't have if I had the answer to that, I would be king of the world, probably. I think right now we're really at odds because we know that, like, the bastions of scientific, accuracy have really been co-opted by ideologues. And so we're really navigating this, like, well, who do we trust now? And, you have people that have stepped into the fray to try to help, dissect that. There are other countries, governmental agencies that, provide context, but there's so much nuance in, like, how one country regulates things and how one, type of scientific study is conducted that, there's really no easy answer to that. I wish there were, but I think, just kind of implementing the general, like, media literacy tips, like verifying with multiple, impartial sources or external sources. I think, historically it was 2, maybe now we want to bump that up to 3, maybe 4. I think, understanding if you're getting an article about a certain health topic, who is the appropriate expert? Like, is that article being written from the point of view of someone who has expertise, but not in that topic, right? We see this all the time with, like, things like sunscreen, and they're consulting a dermatologist for, like, safety of sunscreen. But dermatologists are the experts in skin conditions, right? They're not the experts in chemical formulation, right? Those are chemists or toxicologists. And so this really comes down to, like, the ecosystem of journalism in terms of who is your appropriate expert and how can you use that to help navigate the information you're reading as a consumer, but also as you create journalism information, how you keep that in mind. And so I think, there's so much, like, systemic, reasons for why the wrong experts are often used. But I think we really need to approach all information that we encounter with this extra skeptical eye, because it's so easy to mislead people. And, disinformation is intentional. Misinformation is unwitting often. And it's because, like, your mom sent you this article because she thought that it was important and she doesn't know that it's false, right? And so then it kind of perpetuates this. And so I think we can all play a role in, like, doing that due diligence.
All right, that was our last question. Thank you so much. Thank you for this amazing panel. Really appreciate you guys. And thank you, Max.
All right, let's hear it one more time. What a great conversation. Again, I want to thank all our wonderful speakers here and our host, the Stavros Nikros Foundation Library. And what can I say? I think you guys all said it all here. And please come see us at Fordham University for a panel on unscripted programming. Have a great night.